Leave, or I'll call the police. Those were the first words my daughter screamed at me inside my own mountain lodge. Her voice echoed through the cedar beams, sharp enough to make the wine glasses on the counter tremble. I stood in the doorway, snow still melting off my coat, too stunned to feel the cold. I didn't answer right away. 71 years of holding families, deadlines, and grief together had taught me that silence could speak louder than fury. I only smiled and said, calmly, "Go ahead if you can." The room froze. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. That was the moment I realized peace, the kind I'd built for myself after my husband died, had just been broken clean in two. But let me start from before that moment, before the shouting, before the police lights, before the illusion of family peeled away. My name is Eveline Marchand, retired architect, widow, and designer of this lodge halfway up the Blue Ridge Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. I built it with my late husband 30 years ago. Stone by stone, a retreat for quiet winters and long thoughts. Each December, I returned here alone with groceries, my sketchbook, and a dog-eared copy of a pattern language. It was less a vacation than a ritual of remembering who I was before time took so much. That afternoon, snow fell softly across the ridge as I made the climb. The lodge lights should have been dark, waiting for me. Instead, from the last curve of the road, I spotted smoke curling from the chimney. My heart stuttered. The driveway, once pure white, was scarred with fresh tire tracks. 3 vehicles sat parked by the birches: a white SUV, a silver sedan, and a pickup I didn't recognize. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the caretaker, maybe a mistake. But as I stepped out of the car, the air smelled like roasted meat and laughter, the kind that doesn't belong to strangers, but to people who've made themselves at home. When I reached the porch, the door wasn't locked. My fingers brushed the brass handle, and I hesitated only once. The moment I pushed it open, warm air and noise burst out, colliding with the cold behind me. Inside, my world had already been claimed. The sound hit me first: laughter, bright and careless, woven with music from a Bluetooth speaker I didn't own. I stepped inside slowly, snow melting onto the hardwood floor I'd sanded myself decades ago. Heat from the fireplace wrapped around me, thick with the smell of roasted turkey and the faint sweetness of my own vintage wine, the one I'd stored for holidays I never quite got around to celebrating. My daughter, Marla, was standing near the kitchen island, hair curled perfectly, wearing one of my old cashmere sweaters. She turned at the creak of the door, eyes wide at first, then narrowing like she'd been caught in a half-finished lie. Behind her, her husband Tobin leaned back on the arm of the sofa, holding a wine glass as if the place had always been his. 2 older faces I didn't recognize right away. Tobin's parents sat comfortably near the fire, plates of half-eaten food in their laps. No one moved. The Bluetooth speaker kept playing a cheerful Christmas tune that made everything feel grotesquely polite. I scanned the room, and that's when I saw it, the mantelpiece. The photo of my husband and me, the one taken on the day we finished building this lodge, had been pushed aside. In its place hung a large framed portrait of Tobin's family, smiling as if they'd always belonged here. My throat tightened. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly, though my voice sounded foreign even to me. Marla set her glass down, her tone sharp with something like defense. "Mom, you weren't supposed to come this early." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. I looked around again, the boots by the door, the folded coats on the rack, the scent of detergent that wasn't mine. They hadn't just visited. They'd been living here. Tobin rose, clearing his throat, trying for civility. "We thought you were still in Asheville. Marla said it'd be fine. We were just having a small family gathering." A hollow laugh almost escaped me. "A gathering?" I repeated softly, looking at the empty wine bottles, the stains on the rug, the rearranged furniture. Marla crossed her arms. It's not a big deal. Mom, you always say this house is for family. Her words landed like a slap I couldn't show on my face. Family. I looked at her, my daughter, my only child, and for the first time in my life, she felt like a stranger standing in my home. Marla's cheeks flushed as she took a step toward me, wine glass in hand. The scent of it clung to her words when she spoke too loud, too sharp. You can't just walk in here like this. Mom, you're not supposed to be here tonight. I'm not supposed to. My voice stayed level, though my heart thudded once, heavy and low. Marla, this is my house. Her laugh cracked in the air. You always think everything is yours, the house, the money, the memories. Maybe it's time you realized you can't own everything. She turned to her husband's parents as if performing for them. She does this all the time, controlling, dramatic. Tobin's mother shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking between us. Maybe we should step outside, but Marla cut her off. No, I've had enough. Her voice rose until it filled the rafters. Leave, or I'll call the police. The words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I simply set my grocery bag on the floor, brushed snow from my sleeve, and met her gaze. Go ahead, I said quietly, if you can, for a long moment. The only sound was the pop of the fire. Tobin's mother froze, the color draining from her face. Tobin stared at the floor, pretending to adjust his watch. No one moved. The absurdity of it, the daughter threatening her mother with the police inside her own home, hung in the air like smoke. Then, from outside, came a sudden wash of light through the windows. Headlights. The faint crunch of tires on gravel. Everyone turned. The music stopped. 2 sharp knocks rattled the front door. Tobin's father was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. Did someone actually call them? Before anyone could answer, Marla spun toward me, panic flickering under her defiance. You must have called them. You're trying to humiliate me. I opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, snow collecting on their caps. Ma'am, one said, glancing past me at the crowd inside. We had a noise complaint from a neighbor up the ridge. Is everything all right here? Marla stepped forward too quickly, her words tumbling over themselves. Yes, no, I mean, she broke in. She's not supposed to be here. The officer looked from her to me, then back again. And who exactly is she? I took a slow breath, my hands steady. Her mother, I said, and the owner of this house. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as they stepped inside, the warmth and smell of wine clashing against the cold, still clinging to their uniforms. One of them, a tall man with a calm voice, asked for everyone's identification. Tobin's parents fumbled through their bags, polite, but visibly nervous. Marla thrust her license forward, her hand shaking slightly, while I reached into my coat pocket and handed mine over. The younger officer glanced at it, then looked around the room, the half-eaten food, the empty bottles, the scattered coats that didn't belong. Ma'am, he said, addressing me carefully. You're the property owner, I am. My voice didn't rise above the steady crackle of the fire. This is my residence. They entered without permission. Marla's laugh was small and brittle. That's not true. She lent it to us for the holidays. The officer's pen hovered over his notepad. Do you have proof of that arrangement? Marla's face froze. She turned to Tobin for support, but he looked away, jaw tight. Wait here, I said, my feet finding their own way down the hall. I opened the drawer in my study, the one with the fireproof lockbox I kept for emergencies. Inside lay every document that ever tied me to this land, the original deed signed by both my husband and me, the annual property tax statements, the insurance policy listing my name as sole beneficiary. I carried them back into the living room. Their paper edges soft with time, but still clean. Unarguable. The older officer read each page under the beam of his flashlight. When he finished, he exhaled softly and looked up. If this checks out in our system, ma'am, the property is yours. They'll need to leave voluntarily tonight. Tobin's mother pressed a hand to her chest. My goodness, she murmured, voice cracking. We were told this was theirs. They said you were traveling abroad. I caught her eyes tired, humiliated, and nodded once. Not unkindly. Marla's voice trembled. I thought Dad would have wanted it shared. I set the papers gently on the table. Your father wanted it respected, I said. There's a difference. For the first time all evening, no one spoke. Even the fire settled into silence. The officers stayed until the first signs of retreat began. Suitcases dragged from corners, coats shaken out, the nervous rustle of people pretending this was only a misunderstanding. No one argued now. Marla moved stiffly, avoiding my eyes, her voice hoarse from the wine and the humiliation. Tobin murmured apologies that dissolved into the sound of zippers and closing drawers. I sat at the edge of the dining table, the documents still in front of me, the ink of my husband's signature faint beneath the lamplight. For years, I had thought keeping peace meant paying for it: rent, tuition, car loans, all the quiet transfers that bought temporary calm. Now, watching them pack, I realized every dollar had been another link in a chain I forged myself. I pulled my tablet from my bag and turned it on. The glow of the screen felt sterile against the warm air. My banking app opened with a fingerprint scan, and I began cutting ties line by line. First, the automatic transfer that sent Marla $2,000 every month for expenses. Canceled. Then, an email to my property manager in Asheville, instructing him to end the discounted rent on their downtown apartment. Full market rate. Effective immediately. Lastly, I called the auto loan company, the same one I'd begged for a low interest rate, when Marla claimed she needed an SUV for her in-laws' hospital visits. I gave the account number and requested termination of payments. The woman on the line hesitated, asking if I was sure. Yes, I said. Repossess it when you can. When I hung up, I felt lighter, not triumphant, just unburdened. Tobin's parents approached me quietly. His mother's eyes were red, her hands twisting together. Mrs. Marchand, she whispered. We didn't know. We never would have come here if we'd known. I nodded. I believe you. They left a moment later, their footsteps careful, as though afraid the floor itself might reject them. Marla paused by the door, coat clutched in her arms. You didn't have to do this, she said, almost pleading. I met her eyes. Steady and dry. I built shelters for strangers. I said, for my own child. I built a cage. She looked away first. The door closed softly behind her. And the house, at last, exhaled. When the officers finally left, their boots crunching softly over the snow, the house seemed to sigh. The music was gone, the laughter erased, leaving only the steady crackle of the fire. I stood in the center of the room and listened to the emptiness settle back into its rightful place. It was heavier than quiet. It was reclamation. The air still smelled of smoke and spilled wine. I fetched a cloth and began wiping the counter, one slow stroke at a time. Glass shards glittered beneath the dining table like frost. I swept them carefully into my palm, each piece reflecting fragments of what had been said, what had been broken long before tonight. The photo of my husband lay on the rug, the frame cracked down one corner. I knelt to pick it up, brushing the dust from the glass. His face looked younger than I remembered his eyes, calm, amused, steady. I hung it back above the mantel, where it belonged. The firelight caught the crack in the glass and made it shine, as if even damage could hold light. My chest tightened as I reached for the small pill case in my pocket. One tablet under the tongue, the familiar bitterness, the breath that followed. I sat in my chair by the window, letting the warmth reach my fingers while snow drifted softly outside. The world looked clean again, untroubled, as though the mountain itself had drawn a white sheet over the day. In that quiet, I heard him the echo of my husband's voice the night he was dying. "Protect her," he had whispered, "but never erase yourself. I had done the first too well, and the second not at all. Somewhere between love and fear, I'd mistaken rescue for care. I'd built walls of kindness around her until neither of us could breathe." The clock ticked toward midnight. The house was mine again, mine in a way it hadn't been for years. The fire popped once, scattering a small burst of sparks into the dark, and I whispered, almost to the room itself, "It's done now." For the first time that night, I felt the silence hold me without weight. 3 weeks passed before the first email arrived. The subject line was plain, almost indifferent. Notice of non-payment tenant Hayes. I opened it without hesitation. My property manager's message was short. Rent still outstanding. Legal notice served. Awaiting instruction. I replied with 2 sentences. Proceed according to policy. No extensions. I didn't reread before pressing send. That same afternoon, another notification appeared from the auto loan company. Vehicle repossession scheduled for Friday. 9 a.m. Beneath it was a small photo attachment, the white SUV, parked on a city street, tagged for collection. For a moment, I stared at the image, waiting for some familiar ache to rise. But nothing came. I dragged the email to the archive folder and went back to my work. The town, however, had its own way of keeping accounts. Word travels fast in small communities, even mountain ones. The woman who ran the general store lowered her voice when I walked in. The postman hesitated a little longer than usual with my mail. One neighbor, kindly but pitying, murmured, "Family's messy, isn't it? Maybe she just needs more time." I smiled politely, but inside, something settled, firm and still. They didn't see the years of unpaid promises, the soft threats of guilt, the nights I'd stayed up wiring money while pretending it didn't hurt. They saw only the surface, a mother who had drawn a line and refused to step back across it. That night, I sat by the fire with my journal open on my lap. My handwriting had grown slower, but steadier. I wrote, "Boundaries are not cruelty. They're architecture. The only difference between a wall and a home is intention." When I put the pen down, the words stayed warm in the air, like bricks still wet with mortar. The fire hissed quietly, and for the first time in years, I felt the structure hold. The call came just after sunrise. The mountains were still half asleep, the air thin and blue with cold. I was pouring the first cup of coffee when the phone buzzed against the counter, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. I almost let it ring out. Almost. When I answered, the voice on the other end came in broken gasps. "Mom, it's me, Marla." For a moment, I said nothing. The only sound between us was the faint rattle of wind against the window panes. "Please don't hang up," she whispered. I don't know what to do. Tobin's gone. He packed his things last night and left. His parents told me to get out this morning. I have nowhere. Mom, you can't just watch me fall like this." I pressed my palm to the counter, feeling the cool grain of the wood beneath it. Her words trembled, desperate, but behind them was the same expectation that had followed me for decades, the assumption that I would fix what she broke. "Marla," I said quietly, "you have 2 good hands. Use them." There was a sharp inhale on the line, like she'd been slapped. "You sound just like Dad," she said, the bitterness spilling through the static. I closed my eyes. His voice had said the same thing once, years ago, when she was 17 and wanted to quit everything halfway through. He'd told her to stand on her own, to try harder. She hadn't forgiven him for it then. I breathed in slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Then maybe," I said at last, "you should listen this time." She started to speak again, but her words were drowned by the sound of her own sobbing. I waited until it faded into a low, trembling breath. Then I ended the call. My thumb hovered for a long moment before I pressed the button that read, "Block contact." The screen went dark. Outside, the sun broke over the ridge, thin light spilling across the snow. I stood there with my cooling coffee, the house utterly still, and knew the silence I'd chosen wasn't cruelty. It was survival. By early spring, the mountain had changed its breath. The snow had receded into silver threads that ran down the slope, feeding the earth it had buried for months. I spent my mornings on the porch with gloves and a small trowel, turning the soil where the frost had finally softened. The garden beds were uneven from neglect, but they still remembered my touch. I pressed new seeds into the ground herbs, wildflowers, anything resilient enough to take root in thin air. One afternoon, a knock came at the door. A young couple stood there, both holding sketchbooks stained with charcoal and paint. They had answered the listing I'd posted for the guest loft, 2 artists looking for quiet and light. Their names were Sam and Delia, both polite in the cautious way of people afraid to intrude. Over tea, I showed them the loft and the view of the ridge from its small balcony. Delia ran her fingers along the cedar banister and smiled. "It feels alive," she said softly. I told her that wood only breathes when it's cared for. They paid the full rent without negotiation. That night, I heard the faint hum of their music upstairs, gentle, not invasive, and for the first time, I didn't mind another rhythm in the house. The next day, I helped them adjust the light fixtures in the studio, explaining how to angle the lamps so color stayed honest on the canvas. They listened closely. And when they thanked me, I felt something small and steady shift inside, a use that wasn't obligation, only choice. When evening came, I sat at my drafting table again, pencil tracing the first lines of a cabin floor plan. No client name, no specifications, no deadlines, just space and balance, proportion and air. Across the top of the page, I wrote, "For no one but myself." Outside, the earth exhaled its thawing breath, and the lodge, once again, belonged to the living. A full year had passed since that winter night. The mountain had cycled through its colors, white to green, gold to gray, and settled once more into calm. I had learned to live by its pace, to measure time by the slow thaw of soil and the way light shifted across the porch each morning. That morning, the post arrived later than usual. The mail truck wound up the hill, tires crunching over gravel, before a small white envelope slid through the slot. The return address bore the name of the scholarship fund I'd created the previous spring, the Marchand Design Fellowship, in memory of my husband. I sat by the window, the same one that caught the first light over the ridge, and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written in a young woman's looping hand. She was an architecture student from Raleigh, thanking me for the award that allowed her to finish her final project, an accessible housing model for aging artisans. Her words were warm, full of gratitude, unguarded in the way only someone at the start of their life could be. A second slip fell out of the envelope as I folded the letter. It was a postcard, blank except for a pencil sketch. The lines were quick and familiar, the blue ridge drawn from the same angle as my porch. The hand behind it was uncertain, but practiced. I didn't need a name to recognize it. I held it for a long moment, tracing the outline of the hills. Then I placed both the letter and the postcard beneath the photo of my husband on the mantel. The crack in the glass caught the sunlight again, scattering it gently across the floorboards. Outside, the wind moved through the birches, soft and unhurried. I looked out at the ridge and whispered the words I had finally learned to believe. You can't rebuild someone's life, but you can keep your own standing.